So, in sum, the question of how to judge these various factors of morality is in terms of growth. Growth is the significant metric. So, the end of our moral conduct is not a moral terminus or a final terminus, it's an active process of transforming situations. Growth, as Dewey puts it, is the only moral end. Now, this would even redefine something like happiness, for example. Happiness is a direction of movement, it's not something to possess. Right? Happiness relies upon our success at actively overcoming obstacles or eliminating sources of trouble or even having aesthetic sensibility. So, as with other critiques, Dewey's reconstruction here has an impact on the viability of existing systems of morality. So, for example, take utilitarianism. Right? He praises utilitarianism for being good at pushing for more empirical and more concrete investigations into morality and moral questions. Right? But it was very bad because at locating the end of morality, it sought a single end, a monocausal end, pleasure in one construal and happiness in another. And Dewey thought this actually does damage to morality when it's conceived as moral inquiry, because it is in effect a destructive orientation to that project, because it takes lived experience, present lived experience, and subordinates it to future experience, right? Is this experience creating sufficient pleasure, sufficient happiness? Right? And he relates this in his writings to the way that childhood is often subordinated to adulthood in the process of education. So if anyone has ever asked you, what are you going to be when you grow up? Or, right, this conception that the child's present being is not full, that it's incomplete, that it's on the way to something but not yet fully something. This comes about from the divorce between means and ends that he sees in moral theory as well. Many genuine goods in utilitarianism are dismissed, right, because they are just mere means for pleasure. One other effect of utilitarianism, he notes, is it provides sort of a ready partner to capitalism, capitalism which identifies what's good and what's pleasurable with possessions. And we know that this leads to materialism and commercialism and consumerism, none of which have been shown to lead to much of a happy life or satisfying moral outcomes. It leads to class divisions, right? And I think probably most importantly for our age, it leads to a really devastating separation between business life and the lives of social communities. Right? The idea that the ends of, if you've ever heard this question, do businesses have moral obligations or do they just have an obligation to make profits? This already embodies this radical division between means and ends. So to embrace Dewey's vision or idea of moral inquiry is to recognize that our conflicts about ends can't be resolved by casuistry, right? Simple case rule to case applications, by arbitrary preference, or by some permanent hierarchy of goods. It's also important to note that Dewey is not saying that all cases are equal, right? That when goods or ends are evaluated, they have to be evaluated situationally. And when we evaluate problems situationally, it's natural for us to place a priority on the problem at hand. This doesn't mean that the immediate problem is always going to dominate. There could be a larger situation that, right, in which the immediate situation is nested, and that is the one which we need to pay reference to also. So if I have a lifelong goal of being a healthy person, that has to overcome and perhaps change whatever craving I have, whether it's for sugar or nicotine or what have you. But in all cases, there is a specific inquiry which has to be done. And whatever judgments come about have to somehow anticipate the kinds of actions to which they could apply. Actions which are specific, concrete, and particular. So is there a role for general concepts and ideas in morality then, according to Dewey? Well, think about health, think about justice. These are classic, right, general moral conceptions. Well, Dewey thinks that generalized concepts do help us, right? They help us to compare cases, they help us to make distinctions, they help us to derive, right, other classifications. How? Because they inform the inquiries with new meanings, right? So we can understand that something could be seen as a case of justice or as a case of health or as a case of inequity. And so these general concepts are useful because they're conceptions which direct our inquiry, not because they give us a recipe for how to adjudicate things in an automatic or final way. Now, there are a number of philosophical upshots to this moral approach as well. Because by paying attention to specifics, by thinking of morality as a process of specific inquiries into problematic situations, we intelligize morality, right? We make morality intelligent by making it a form of inquiry that's experimental, that's fallible. We moralize intelligence, right? In the sense that we're forced to reconstruct our reflective practices by connecting them with human problems. It also dissolves the problem of evil, right? Because we now understand that the problem is to regard specific evils or deficiencies in the situations in which they come up and in other situations which might come up. Right? So morality doesn't lead to metaphysical questions, it leads to empirical ones. We recognize finally that there's no overarching moral cast for the universe, right? It's not a pessimistic universe or an optimistic universe. It's a melioristic universe in the sense that we're no longer going to try to give metaphysical takes on goodness or badness or on world design, because optimism and pessimism are both blocks to inquiry and they diminish moral effort. So the pragmatic conviction, rather, is that life can and should be bettered, made better, and this is a view called meliorism. And meliorism is an approach which inspires real, if perhaps more humble, confidence. Now there's one more point to make that Dewey brings up in the chapter, and that's the connection between morality and education. And I've intimated this before a moment ago. For Dewey, the educative process is a moral one, and vice versa, right? Morality is an educative process. The question is how to reconstruct experience from worse to better. Education goes wrong, Dewey thinks, when it separates childhood from adulthood, right? The problem of devaluing the present for either the past or the future. Education goes wrong as optimism goes wrong because it places too much emphasis on what is not present, right? The future or the past. This has a very practical result, which it makes children feel devalued. They feel as if education has nothing to do with them, with who they are, with what they're interested in, with what their aspirations or hopes are. The other effect it has is it also devalues adults. And this is odd, but it's true, because adults are seen, once they're done with school, as no longer learning. They're complete, right? They've got their training, they've got their job, they've started their lives. And I know that the phrase lifelong learning is often on the mouths and the minds of a lot of people and educators, but as long as school emphasizes the future over the present, then anyone who gets through that school is going to feel as if they've arrived and that they're done with learning. And this is, right, not good, especially for a democracy where we're always learning things together. And this brings me to the final point about this chapter. Dewey's point about morality culminates in one about democratic life. All institutions, Dewey says, in a democracy should have education growth as their implicit end. And I want to end this lecture by quoting a powerful passage from the last page of the Dewey reading, chapter 7. Dewey writes there that the test of all the institutions of adult life is their effect in furthering continued education. Government, business, art, religion, all social institutions have a meaning, a purpose. That purpose is to set free and develop the capacities of human individuals without respect to race, sex, class, or economic status. And this is all one with saying that the test of their value is the extent to which they educate every individual into the full stature of his possibility. Democracy has many meanings, but if it has a moral meaning, it is found in resolving that the supreme test of all political institutions and industrial arrangements shall be the contribution they make to the all-around growth of every member of society. Well, that's the end of this lecture on Dewey's Chapter 7 of Reconstruction in Philosophy. I hope it's been helpful for you, and I look forward to talking with you about it.